Well, scouting has influenced my life in a couple of significant ways. First, as many of you know, I'm a public service attorney and judge. I've spent 18 years as Chief Judge of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm currently Chief Judge at a new office of renewable energy siting. Thinking back, I think that my interest in environmental protection began, at least in part, as a result of my scouting experiences and growing up in Berkeley, California, and camping and hiking with Berkeley Boy Scout Troop 26 in the Sierra Nevadas and other natural areas in Northern California. And then certainly with scouting's lessons on citizenship and public service, that at least I think contributed, at least in part, to my choosing a career in public service and environmental law. And then secondly, I think I learned, at least the start of my education on leadership began in Boy Scouts when I was, a senior scout in Troop 26 and was serving the troop as a patrol leader. It seemed that I always ended up with the troop misfits in my patrol, but it was from that experience that I learned how to, or at least started to learn how to work with diverse and often difficult people and reach successful outcomes in attaining our common goals, something that has served me in my professional life. Well, the most memorable experiences are those that involve my children, Malcolm and Emily. Started back in Malcolm's Cub Scout pack. Our family, Malcolm, Emily, and a mystery scout named Angus used to enter and win all of the various heats that during the event. I know that the other Cub Scouts were delighted when Malcolm finally moved up to Boy Scouts, because then suddenly somebody else could win finally. Continued, in scouting. There, moments that stick out in my mind. I remember in particular when my son Malcolm was tapped out for the Vigil Honor in the Order of the Arrow. I never saw him so happy, and I was so proud of him for that recognition. My daughter Emily, she was in a venture crew that a couple of years was responsible for health and safety at the Schenectady Klondike Derbies that were held at Camp Boyhaven, and I remember being so proud of her and her fellow crewmates for taking on, which is a pretty significant responsibility for young people, and doing it with distinction. But mostly, it was the backpacking and hiking, the Adirondack fire towers, canoeing expeditions, camporees and jamborees, and all those kinds of things that I got to do with the kids, and that I've really enjoyed the most in scouting. Well, I think my main goal as a scouter was to help provide our youth with the best scouting program possible in whatever ways I could, and I think I've largely managed to be successful with that. My wife keeps saying to me, it's time to sort of step back and maybe let some others take up the responsibilities of running the program, and I think she's right. So I think if I have any future goals, it's really to see about helping to develop the next generation of adult volunteers and hopefully hand off a program that is stronger than the one that I inherited when I began as a scouter. Well, I made a list. So first, I would, of course, want to thank the scouters who influenced me as a youth. Two come to mind in particular, Mrs. Hashimoto. She was William Hashimoto's mother, who was our den mother in PAC 96 in Berkeley, and who always kept Cub Scouts fun for us. The other one who really sticks out to me is Mr. Hayashi, who was an assistant scoutmaster for Troop 26 in Berkeley. And he was one of those scoutmasters that tended to really help out and guide the older scouts, particularly as they were working their way through, life, star life and Eagle, and leading the patrol. And to some extent, he sort of served as a model for me in my scouting career, at least in terms of our troop. As far as my careers as an adult scouter, I have to thank all the adult volunteers who I worked with over the years that made scouting such a fun and rewarding experience. So kind of roughly chronological order. Pack 101, Barbara Weldon was the Cub Master for Malcolm's first Cub Scout pack, so I'd like to thank her. Bob Keach, who was the Cub Master at Pack 101, a rather colorful and interesting man. One of the things I was proud of is that it not only did Pack 101 do the Pinewood Derby during our time there, but we also did the Rain Gutter Regatta, and I think we're probably the only pack that ever did the Space Derby. So, then that was largely under Keach's influence. Malcolm moved up to Troop 48 in Amsterdam. His first scoutmaster was Mike Kielgalen, followed by the Stewarts, Mike Stewart and his wife, who served on the, Mike Stewart served as the scoutmaster, and his wife served as the head of the troop committee. They're followed by the Kleins, Dave and Barb Klein. Brent Fettaplace and Deborah Slezak have been with the troop and are still with the troop. The more recent adults I have to thank would be the companies, who are not only helping lead the troop, but are also now active with the Arrow chapter. And then there's the McCurds, and then specifically Rebecca Slezak, Honorable Rebecca Slezak, who is now serving as the Scoutmaster for Troop 48. My daughter was in Crew 13, which was the American Indian Dancers, and there I'd like to recognize Charlie Hevner, of course, who led that up, and Sharon Kreutz, who was there to help us get the scouts moved around and get into costume and all the things that they did. She's also been very active in the district, and thank her for that. Next, there's the advisors and the former Thandinega chapter, and now the Naxanimet chapter. Thandinega, Bill Andrist, Steve Miller, Mark and Simon Will. I remember, I will never forget one Thandinega outing camping on Scout Island, where we had to weather what seemed like a hurricane, and eventually had to depart the island in high seas. Also like to recognize Jason Brott, who was my vigil honor guide. And then with the combination of Thandinega and Sicilja and parts of Tionawada into Naxanimat, advisors like Barb Potter, Pam Seabast, Sandra Rigging, Dr. George Pasquale, Greg Cesney, Tom Waters, and of course Scott Kilborn, who I have to continuously thank for taking the lead in helping us conduct our chapter elections in a very large chapter now. At the district level, Tom Blackman, who when he was a district exec was singularly devoted to keeping the Cub Scout program going, and somebody who I miss his input these days. People that I've worked together with on planning camporees like Jay Weigel, Rick Stelrecht, Barry Party, and then of course Bob and Ben Colley. And both Bob and Ben were also colleagues at the 2017 Jamboree, when we served as commissioners at that Jamboree. And then finally, of course, Alicia Sherman, who is a camporee planner par excellence. And then finally the Catan Lodge advisors, Mike Shaver, who keeps us all in our regalia, Joe Berlant, who reminds us of where we all came from, Skip Lee, who was Malcolm's 2013 Jamboree Scoutmaster. I want to thank my current fellow chapter advisors, the Ciccolellas, Nancy Ciccolella and her son, Mark Bacchus, Don Coons, who was also a colleague at the 2017 Jamboree, Pat Andrews, and then there's of course the Tamak contingent, the Mighty Tamaks, Keith Bemis, Mike Harding, Jeff Covington, and of course all the Couchets. And then the last two, Michael Casey, who always I enjoy debating how to improve student government with him at meetings, and then of course George Casey. And I know that George and I share a sentiment that part of the reason that we continue to do what we do in Scouts is because we feel the sense of obligation to give back to an organization that we feel gave so much to ourselves and to our family, in particular our sons. And also, I think we both realize that probably most of our adult friends now are in Scouts. And then finally, I have to thank my family, Malcolm and Emily, and that mystery scout Angus, for allowing me to share at least part of this experience with them. And then, of course, there's my wife, Sue, who I love you very much, dear. And I really appreciate all of your support and patience throughout all of this.